Maxine. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Strad Sunday discussion, which is in collaboration with the LSO's International Violin Festival. We're here today to talk about auditions, how terrifying they are, how to survive them, how to do really well at them. And I have two colleagues here, Maxine Kwok-Adams, who's a first violinist in the LSO, and Germán Clavijo, who is a viola player in the LSO. I myself am Jonathan. I'm Director of Music at the Guildhall, but I'm also a recovering musician, having formerly been a member of the double bass section in the LSO. So, auditions as far as the LSO are concerned. Maxine, can I ask you about your own personal experience of coming here to audition for the LSO?
Well, it's probably, I'd say, one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done, of course, because it's something that means so much to you, and you know it's going to be over in 15, 20 minutes. One thing I do remember is I went through a spate of having, you know, my lucky watch, my lucky ring, lucky dress, and all that sort of stuff. Got ready for to go to the audition, and the zip broke on my dress. So I did an audition on stage here, basically with my dress held together at the back with safety pins all the way out. So that sort of made me, I think it's not a good idea to have all these sort of superstitions and lucky things. It's never really bodes well. But you know, it's nice to be on the other side of it all, obviously having done a couple of auditions, first for the LSO's youth string scheme that we run here, and then for the orchestra properly. And but now to sit on a panel and see people coming in and auditioning, it's very interesting, and we always want people to do really well. So hopefully, if there are any questions, then we can help people get an idea of what's expected and to make it a bit less scary, I think.
So you did the LSO side-by-side scheme. This is a scheme that's open to young students, music students, obviously. They have to audition. And they get the opportunity to sit in a section and rehearse with the LSO, and in most cases to play in the concerts. So coming back to do a second professional audition, as it were, was that better or worse, having got to know the section?
It was more scary, I think, because there's an element of coming into an audition if you don't know the people on the panel. You can walk in, you know, I've done lots of auditions in my life. There have been times where I've not been happy with the way I've played, and I've left and thought, that's fine, never have to see them again. But of course, because I'd been doing played in the LSO's string scheme, I got to know players. I'd started doing extra work. I'd made good friends. So of course, there was more pressure to do an audition where you know the people and you count them as your friends. It means so much more. So I have to say that was, I'd say, the hardest audition I've ever had to do, just because I'd wanted it so much and I didn't want to let people down, for sure.
Exactly. Now, Germán, you did a number of auditions. You also did...
Yeah, my case is quite the opposite of Maxine. Although I studied in London and I had the chance to audition for the LSO string scheme, I wasn't good enough. Apparently. And so I didn't get into the scheme. And then I played a proper professional audition in 2006. And again, I wasn't good enough. I didn't get offered a trial. I think my sight reading was the weakest thing in that particular audition. And then I insisted, and in 2009, I came again. I was living in Spain, and I came all the way here. Probably a lot more experience, and I have never been a natural sort of bulletproof audition player at all, and I'm not that kind of player now either, and I guess that what made me go through a lot of thought, not only about my playing, but particularly about how to prepare the previous weeks, how to build up to an audition, which I think players sometimes we forget. We we tend to practice and practice and practice as if it was a training. But if we think about sports, any tennis player, they train a lot, but then they have to go into the circuit and play many matches up until they build not only the confidence you need, but also the concentration and the frame of mind that you need.
And it's a very particular experience, isn't it? I always tell our students, and delighted to see some Guildhall students here, that there is no substitute for the experience of doing an audition. It doesn't matter how you prepare in your practice room. Playing to people that you're less comfortable with is sometimes a good idea, but there is still no relationship that is sufficiently like walking into a room full of people who look very sternly at you and often sit with their arms folding waiting to be impressed. And I know from my experience, I think I did 20 auditions or so before I had any success at all. And in fact, the first successful one I did was here in the choir rooms for the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And I knew it had gone well because at the end of it, Jack McCormack, who was principal bass in those days, said, "What are you doing on Saturday, lad?" So I knew I'd obviously got over the starting line, which was great. But, I mean, what you're saying, it sounds to me like you had to do a number of auditions to get good enough at auditions in order to be successful.
Yes, and I tried all sorts of things, from playing to neighbors that knew nothing about music, and which was also terrifying, auditioning to my brother in Argentina through Skype and playing for him through Skype, which was also terrifying. Somehow the frame of mind that you need in an audition, that sometimes first round might take 4 or 5 minutes, and you might be asked to play 3 pieces in that time, which requires a number of different skills in terms of not only sound and articulation, but musically, different styles. In a way, it's like being an actor and having to show different styles without changing the outfit, but being able to reproduce different characters in a very short frame of time. And I think it's very important to be able to switch from Mozart to Mahler to Wagner to Bach to Bach. And how do you do that? And I think that you have to practice as well at home. It's not just nailing the concerto or every passage, but it's particularly how to switch and what kind of character are you actually playing. And
instantly having to go straight into it.
Are you Mary or are you Hamlet or are you Sophie? Who are you in that? I think we tend to forget that we are musicians.
Yes.
And I think every panel will be delighted to see the musician, not just a bulletproof instrumentalist, because at the end of the day, it's a bit of a schizophrenic subject, right? Because you have been asked to be bulletproof, but at the same time, very sensitive and charming and flexible, and all of that in about 4 minutes.
Yes.
It's just impossible.
Yes.
So I think flexibility might be something, I don't know, Maxine, if you agree with me, but it's something that in orchestras, you walk into a room to play the auditions, you've never been in that room, so you don't know what the acoustic is like, you don't know the pianist, often you don't have any pianist, and if you do, you might not have any time to rehearse. So you don't know what your instrument is going to sound out there. And you've been preparing for weeks for that, and all of a sudden, in about 10 seconds, you are so shocked, you don't know how to react to that. And that's the very difficult thing to predict, because it's unpredictable. So the only thing I think we can do as individuals is somehow train your brain and train your concentration in order to focus on the important things. And there are certain things that they are probably uncompromising and common denominator. You need to play with a beautiful sound, very, very good intonation, Carry on, Maxine. I'm running out of breath.
Those are all really super valid points, because it is unreal, you know, especially if you've been, you know, you've just been at music college, you're used to playing full works, you know, concertos all the way through. Of course, an audition is so unreal. You know, you go in there, you feel like, oh my God, you know, there's a group of people there, and it's very easy to think we're just there to sort of judge you and pick on the mistakes. Of course, we're looking and we're hoping you're going to play well. And of course, we have to stop you in the middle of some fantastic passage of music, and it feels all very wrong, and then you have to change over to something else, and it can be very, it just makes you feel, oh gosh, you know, where's my head at? Which I think it's really important when you walk into an audition situation, is to take a minute to just, you know, sort yourself. Just, you know, you've got to tune up anyway, so use the time to get a sense of the acoustic, see, you know, how you feel, just to, you know, and then hopefully you can just play at your best. And there's obviously, the more you're prepared, the less that can go wrong. I believe that. There's, you know, it's not that you're just going to flukely play amazingly. You have to put the hours in. It's all about working hard, but you can help yourself in an audition situation by, as you say, if there's an important audition you want to go for, you need to just be auditioning in different places and putting yourself into different situations where you feel uncomfortable, because you will feel uncomfortable. It's not a very realistic way of performing music, and unfortunately we don't have time to have somebody play, you know, entire movements of anything. So, but as you say, it's true, you need to be able to switch from, you know, in a violin audition you'd be playing probably Mozart the moment you come in, and then 5 minutes later you need to be playing a big concerto, you know, part of a first movement of something, and to show your versatility. And that's even before we, you know, you get to orchestral excerpts, which are another chapter.
The other thing I'd say about preparation is not to anticipate. I think there are, certainly at a student level, there's an idea that somehow on the day the muse is going to descend from the mantelpiece and you will be inspired and all will be well. Under those stressful situations, that is highly unlikely to happen. So in a way, you have to manufacture the expression on the day, because the chances are you're not going to feel like you want to play in a very particular mood. And I think what Maxine and Germán have both said, you're switching between expressive qualities and moods and genres at such a quick-fire pace. You have to be able to do it almost automatically. And it's a very particular art that I don't think in performance terms you come across at quite such a fast rate anywhere else. But let's quickly talk about the practical things. I want to get onto the psychological ones in a minute, but the practical things, the LSO requirements are for 1 or 2 solo pieces and some prepared orchestral excerpt, if that's still the case.
Yeah.
Are there particular solo works that you think people ought to choose?
I mean, I really don't think it's the time to sort of throw in something that people don't know. I've heard a lot of auditions, and there have been a handful where I've literally never heard of the composer, and it already it means that the panel are slightly off it, because you're trying to think about the piece. It doesn't mean, you know, we're not listening to you, but I think it's better to play something that is fairly standard, but then there's a massive range. I mean, there's so much in the violin repertoire, for example, that can be played as your romantic concerto. And, you know, things like, to be honest, I don't want to hear something like Schuss 1 first movement. It's not going to, that doesn't show a range of playing. That is just sort of one kind of sound. It needs to be something you feel is going to show you off to your, you know, you're playing, you know, and the thing is, if there are 10 people in a row playing Tchaikovsky or Sibelius or Beethoven or Brahms, it doesn't matter. You know, if you play it well, it will shine through and it will be noticed. And obviously for the violins, it's a choice of Mozart, first movement of a concerto.
Yeah.
So and then yes, your excerpts.
And Germán, is there a particular approach? I was recollecting that Ozawa was once criticised by some of the Boston Symphony Orchestra because he rejected a player for sounding too much like high fits in audition, which, you know, begs the question. I can understand where he was coming from. It was a question about the solo sound and not blending, but do you think there's a very particular, because that, you know, playing as a soloist standing here is different from being an orchestral musician?
Of course. Well, when I think back about my successful audition with LSO, I was living in Spain, as I said. I had no idea, really, what's the string style of playing of the LSO. Mm-hmm. So that didn't count in my case. I think it might be important in the moment where you decide what concerto to go for, is to analyze a little bit with your teacher, if you're still studying, or with people that you trust, which are your weaknesses, which are your strengths, and work not just on the weaknesses, but also on the strengths. As I said previously, I've never been a very good orchestra audition player. And I'm Latin, you know, from South America. So usually a lot of not very controlled sort of emotions and just overwhelmed with, and that happened to be one of my strengths, funny enough. One I sort of managed to keep it under a frame. So I think it's important that people don't get discouraged by the weaknesses, but they make the most out of the strengths in order to provide, as I said before, a musical experience. Once I was sitting on this side of the panel many times, and I remember watching someone, a cellist, who played really like a recital. And in 2 minutes, we were all very sort of taken by the musicianship, and we sort of forgot about listening out for the rhythm or for the sound or for the intonation. It was a musical experience, which is really hard to achieve in an audition. But that, obviously, was probably one of his strengths, that performance skill. And I think is, you know, you are competing against many other players, but in England, where you have this trial process, you're actually competing with yourself, just to bring the best of yourself, because you know, the orchestra can decide to take 4 or 5 people for one job, and there might be several people on trial.
We'll come to trials in a moment, but I think it's worth saying on the point about that Germán has just made, that another thing that I always say to students is take something that you have played for some time. Don't think, okay, well, I'm right at the edge of my technical envelope here and I want to show everyone what I can do with the work that I've just been playing for the last 2 weeks. Again, the chances are to achieve what Germán has just described in this very good audition, it's highly unlikely that you will do that if it's a work that you haven't played for long enough or played a number of times in public. But one thing I noticed a lot with the LSO double bass auditions is we had many, many extraordinary solo double bass players came along, blew us away with their solo work, and then when we asked them to play the scherzo from Beethoven 5, it was almost unrecognizable. So let's talk a little bit about the orchestral excerpts.
Oh, yeah, this can be a real bugbear, because it's so disappointing when you get someone who's come along and they're absolutely fantastic. They really wow you with their concertos, and then you ask for, you know, the excerpts, and they obviously just probably picked them up that morning, had a little go and things. It's so crucial. It always gives me the impression then that, are you really serious about being in an orchestra? Because, you know, once you're in an orchestra, that you might do an occasional concerto or something somewhere, but this is going to be your life. This repertoire is crucial, and there's really, you cannot over prepare things like that. Certainly when I first would do auditions, I you know, it meant going to libraries and getting CDs. These days it's so easy. You know, you've got YouTube, all sorts of free resources to listen to the music. I mean, I cannot count how many times I've heard excerpts where it's really obvious the person playing has not even heard the piece because it's completely the wrong style, the wrong tempi, there are wrong notes and things. So stuff like that you can eliminate instantly by listening to a couple of recordings of the pieces. And you get, you know, certainly with the LSO, you get the excerpts in plenty of time, so you can really work on them with someone or play them to people, but it's just, it's a no-brainer for me. I just think there's no excuse for not being able to prepare them to the best of your ability, because, you know, all you have to do is listen to them and play along. And also, actually, some people always ask, what about, you know, if there are bowings and fingerings in the part that gets sent to you? I mean, I'd say you use them as a guide, but it's not sort of like the be-all and end-all of everything to not go exactly with it.
One of the things I always look for as a bass player was rhythm, and I was always astonished at the number of students that came in that didn't subdivide and keep the subdivision going. So they'd, you know, maybe there'd be a bar and a half's rest, and they'd come in again after a bar and a quarter. And it was clear they're not continuing to subdivide all the time. And particularly when you're playing on your own, you've got to be so self-reliant as far as that aspect's concerned. But Herman, are there other things that you look for?
Well, one of the things that, again, coming to the point where how to switch from one piece to the next, I think it's very important to have a plan. Because, you know, they might tell you, can you play, please, Midsummer Night's Dream, Shostakovich, 5 and Mahler 10, whichever order you want. And that's the worst of the things, because you have to decide. You have a choice, and you don't know. So you have to know what suits you best. You know, playing Midsummer Night's Dream after playing Don Juan, Strauss, is really hard. Yeah. So you have to anticipate possible situations.
Do you think that's part of the test? Do you think panels are looking to see that?
No, I don't think so.
No one ever does it to trip people up.
No. Because everyone knows how tricky the situation is. But that's why I think the weeks before auditions are terribly important, especially nowadays where there is so much distraction. And I love technology, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I see students practicing with the Facebook, you know, with the iPhone on the stand. You never heard of that, probably.
Do that.
And, you know, the level of concentration varies enormously on the practice time. And, I mean, I found myself being in situations where I had to really concentrate, and things go through your mind. Probably it is a time in life where we are exposed, certainly, to a lot of information, visual, acoustic contamination, everything. And so you have to sort of get to know yourself and see what works for me. You know, eating, for example. People, you know, prepare for weeks, and then, oh no, today I can't have breakfast. I have this audition, my stomach is like a stone. I can't eat. You might need to eat, because you might walk there, you know, adrenaline goes up, all of a sudden you're like a jelly.
Okay, so now's the moment to talk about bananas and turkey, because particularly in the States, bananas and turkey are regarded as the things you eat before audition. They both contain tryptamine, which triggers serotonin in the brain, which is a natural sedative. I understand, I'm not a scientist, I'm a bass player, so I know very little about these things, but apparently bananas are better because the sugar helps the brain to process serotonin, whereas turkey has very little sugar in it. Any theories about that?
Oh, I didn't know that. I don't actually like bananas.
What about bananas and turkey together?
Oh, you do an amazing audition on Christmas Day then, if the turkey thing is true. I think, I mean, everybody has their own little, you know, I mean, I wouldn't eat a big meal before an audition or anything like that, and, you know, make sure that you have a snack and something to give you energy, but obviously not a triple espresso or something like that. But I think it's whatever works, whatever works for the individual person.
Yeah, and students and young people, you know, we never have enough money in the pocket. So we always make classic mistake, you know, going to Germany or going to Spain or France for an audition, you know, there's a 10 o'clock start, and then you say, well, it's a very cheap flight at 6 going from Stansted, so you go and sleep in the airport the night before. By the time you get to an audition, you know, there are no miracles somehow.
Having said that, one of the best auditions I ever did was at the Opera House in front of Haitink, and I drove there because I had my bass. And I got cut up by someone, I nearly crashed the car just before I went into this audition. And I was so angry, I didn't care about it. You know, they introduced Bernard Haitink to me, and I was sort of, whatever. And I was so cross, I just played, and it was one of the best performances I've ever done. So maybe you should try and crash the car beforehand, I don't know. Let's talk very quickly about screened auditions as well, because for me, that was absolute hell. Have either of you experienced screened auditions?
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know this, this is something very common in the States particularly, where the panel sits behind the screen. In fact, in some orchestras, they persuade the candidates to take their shoes off, so the candidates, it's not clear whether they're male or female, and you're not allowed to speak at all. So it's done entirely on what the panel hears, but it's a devilish kind of experience.
I've never experienced it. I actually think it's a good idea, because it takes away a lot of prejudices, and you focus on what you actually hear, which for me is, you know, I want someone to have, you know, excellent intonation, a beautiful sound, good rhythm. That for me is, that's what I want to hear, and I don't need to be distracted by anything else but hearing that. And because of course you
if they're wearing a dress that's come apart at the back,
or you just start thinking, you know, oh, I know that person, or, you know, and people are reading CVs, oh yeah, I know them, and blah blah blah. You kind of, it takes that away, and it really just takes it down to whether the playing is what you want, and then nobody can sort of turn around and say, well, you were influenced because you know that person from this and that. So I personally think it's a good idea. I've never experienced it for myself.
That's probably
But
why
you-
I think it's a good idea.
I think it's a terrible,
perhaps.
terrible
Have you done
I've been through a couple of times, and I don't think it's a good idea. For one simple reason, I think maybe 99% of the musicians I know that have been through that, they haven't played up to their standard. I think it benefits somehow, it plays in favor of people who are sort of bulletproof technically, but not, you might lose the chance or waste the chance of listening to really interesting musicians.
I think feeling that you're not communicating with a human being as well is really hard. I did one in the Wigmore Hall, and to this day I'm not even sure there was anyone listening. I just couldn't see where
they went off
were.
for a tea break or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think certainly in America it's screened, isn't it, for a round or two? I mean, certainly they don't appoint somebody having not then sort of had them perform for them, but it's an interesting.
But actually, going through the first round often is the most difficult thing.
Your first.
Because you de-block yourself. Once you've been told you go to the second round, then you sort of become a human being.
Yeah, exactly.
And
There's a great story about LPO doing some auditions in the ballet rooms in the festival hall, and a fiddle player came in and it was disastrous. And at the end of the audition, he went up to the screen and said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." So there we are. Let's talk a bit more about the psychological approach. We know it's a terrifying experience. Are there particular techniques that you would encourage candidates to use? Deep breathing, meditation, Class A drugs? What would you advise?
I mean, I think, I mean, deep breathing is great. I think for me, if you've made sure that you've really super prepared, there is nothing else you can really do. Obviously, sometimes you just need a bit of luck. Sometimes you feel great on the audition. I've had times where I've just thought, yes, that was just absolutely fantastic. And other times I've just sort of crawled out of the room with my head held down. You know, I think it just depends on what sort of person you are. I think if I feel I've been prepared and I've played to a lot of people, put myself in awkward situations already, you do feel a little bit better about it. Look, you're never going to walk into an audition room thinking, yes, I can't wait, you know, this is great, whatever. Yeah. It's always going to feel alien and a little bit strange. You might not have the luxury of playing in a space like this. You might be in a tiny room where the panel are literally, you know, on your knees. It doesn't, there's not a lot one can do. I don't think it's a good idea to start relying on things like taking anything or having a drink before anything, because it just, I think that just spirals into, you know, into something that you feel you cannot do something without relying on this crutch. It really needs to just, you know, if you just try and focus on that, you've worked hard, and some, you know, and it's not the end of the world if it didn't go well. You know, we've all done auditions where you just think, oh God, you know, and then you just have to think, you know, there's another day. So I think.
Yeah, I think one of the things that helped me particularly was the great desire to get into that orchestra. Yeah. I've done auditions, not for the sake of it, but for the experience of not thinking anything in particular about that orchestra, well, maybe. But when I really wanted to get into that orchestra, when it really made something for me emotionally, that was when I played the best auditions. And as a matter of fact, in the preparation, my best auditions were when I had less time to prepare. I had two little girls, two-year-old, 3 months old, and I had maybe 2 hours a day just to focus between, 10 o'clock at night and midnight. That was the only time where I could. And somehow I understood where my focus was and how to prepare mentally for that.
For certain candidates, there are a lot of good books about the psychology of playing. There's one written a long time ago by Barry Green called The Inner Game of Music, which was a sequel to one by Tim Galway, which was The Inner Game of Tennis. There's a more recent one called The Chimp Paradox by Steve Peters, who is the psychologist for the British cycling Olympic team. And they attribute most of their success to him. And quite a lot of these books, what they have in common is the idea that you have an inner chimp, a monkey on your shoulder, who is giving you a commentary the whole time saying, you're rubbish, you haven't prepared well enough, the next person's much better looking than you, you haven't got a chance, this is the LSO, why on earth do you ever think you could get into the LSO? And all of those kind of things. And there are a lot of techniques that they suggest about how you switch the monkey off and get him to go back in his box. They're useful. I think mindfulness, those kind of activities are really helpful, but you have to do them a lot in order to prepare and really to be in that mindset. And there are all ways of subverting the fight or flight adrenaline, the idea that the prehistoric part of your brain is saying if you stand up there, you're going to be attacked by a wild animal, essentially. And even if you rationalize with it and say, come on, this is the 21st century in the Barbican, no one's got a machine gun, I'm not going to die, it will still say, but you're going to make a terrible fool of yourself. So you have to find ways, your own ways of subverting that. And I don't think there's any magic bullet. I think there are different things for different people, and you have to try them all and pick and choose from those disciplines. From
a practical point of view, just always leaving enough time to get to an audition. There's nothing worse than we've had people where they haven't turned up and they're running late, and then we've had to swap people around and they've rushed in, and it doesn't matter. Just get there really early so that you have time to just settle yourself and have some water and a good warm up. There might not be masses of room to warm up, but at least then you've got a place you can just sit and focus yourself rather than just being on the tube thinking, actually I should have left more time and getting more and more het up about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It might be worth saying on the very practical things. And as obvious as it might seem, when you are playing in the audition, no matter how well prepared you are, when there is a hard shift, or a hard stroke to do, your brain has to be 100% there.
Yeah.
I always tell my students, when Federer or Djokovic, they're playing a game, I mean, how many times they pass the ball through the net? Millions every week. And yet they miss some of them.
Yeah.
In order to get the ball where they really want, they really have to focus. No matter how many times you practice and no matter how many times you nail it at home, at the moment you have to be with yourself. That's why I insist a lot in the concentration, into be with yourself, with your instrument and with the music, and maybe forget about everything else.
I think that's important. Another anecdote that I always tell is, as a bass player, we were always slightly naughty boys in auditions, and one year we did nearly 200 auditions, and as you can imagine, it becomes quite a routine. And so we decided to mark every candidate as they walked in the door, between walking in the door and sitting down before they played a note. And what was really terrifying was 95% of the time our marks were the right ones. And that, I think, speaks volumes about this question that Germán has raised about focus and intention and being present in the room, because it's so self-evident as soon as someone walks in, whether they are or whether they're not. So I think that's a really critical part. We're running short of time, but I do want to touch on trials, because they are a very particular animal. And they're something that UK orchestras all do. Once you've done an audition, you're invited to a trial. And that can last anything from a week to, in my case, 2 years, because very sadly, in the middle of my first trial, the principal bass, Bruce Mollinson, very sadly passed away. So I had to start all over again, another audition and another trial, and the whole process took 2 years. And there's a real psychological burden of coming in, working with an orchestra, day in, day out, socializing with them, but not actually being one of their number, but always there's a sense of being judged, is there not?
Yes, it's a tough thing for people to do. Certainly with my trial, I remember, because of course you want to be yourself, but you're very mindful of the fact that you want people to like you, to like having you around. I think the only advice I can give is you have to be yourself, because of course it can go on for months, and there's no point just trying to sort of fake it. And I mean, obviously from a musical point of view, just being super prepared with all the programs and being 100% on top of it is crucial, because people are going to be judging that, whether, and the thing is, you might come in on something which, Prokofiev 5 or something, and it might be your first time playing it, and the orchestra's probably played it hundreds of times, and you need to just sort of start fitting in very, very quickly. This is what we're sort of looking for.
So that's both musically and socially?
Yeah, of course, because there is a social element in it. An orchestra is such a social animal, and it's very hard to, you can't sort of, you don't really do a trial by just sort of sitting there and not sort of participating in the whole sort of drama of what an orchestra is. But and whether you sort of fit into a kind of, I mean, it's not that we take specific types of people, it just works out that way sometimes, that people are specific fits, or it's quite an interesting process actually to observe. And
every section is different.
Yeah, the sections are so different, and what they're looking for. But of course, if you're on trial, you're probably not going, you're not going to want to be sort of the chatterbox who's constantly, doing all that. But also on the other hand, you don't want to be, a little mouse who's too scared to sort of to interact with anyone. There's a sort of balance, but you just have to remember, you got to that point, and it's well done, and you just then have to try and see how it will go.
Yeah, I think again, being an interesting musician also happens by trying to interact and be interested by other musicians, and which are human beings.
Absolutely.
And everything adds up. You have to make the effort. I mean, sometimes I remember my very first trial was on the third day. There was a trip to Paris, and I happened to be seated on a train just by the seat that I was allocated with someone in the percussion. We had the headphones on, and we didn't cross a single word, which, you know, is a situation where you can become very paranoid about, because, you know, I'm on trial, what am I supposed to do? But I think people tend to be very friendly, and they react to what you have to offer as well. It's a bit of a mirror situation.
Exactly. We have 5 minutes remaining. Are there any burning questions? I think Pauline is somewhere with a roving mic. There she is. Any questions for the panel, please?
I have one that was sent in earlier. I'm going to read it out because I'm not quite sure. If you don't have a lot of professional experience on your CV, does that really matter? Are you going to get accepted for an audition?
I think you are, but I think what you mustn't do is fabricate a whole list of spurious orchestras, because there's nothing as bad as that. So I would suggest you keep the list to a minimum of just a few quality, even if they're amateur orchestras, just a few quality ones, and not try and put a huge list together of things that you've done.
And are there any orchestral training courses you can recommend?
Well, of course, the Guildhall's Orchestral Artistry programme, in collaboration with the LSO. The LSO sit on the panels to select students. They are a fully integral part of the programme, delivering the provision, and then they help to assess the students at the end. And all the students get the opportunity to play with this wonderful orchestra. Coming up in June, we've got Sir Simon Rattle conducting Walton 1 in a real side-by-side, one LSO player, one Guildhall player. So thank you for that plug, Maxine.
There was a genuine question that came in.
There was a question from a gentleman down here, Pauline.
Thank you. Coming from the field of education myself, I was interested in this last question that's been asked. Presumably, there is in the curriculum at the Guildhall School and other conservatoires preparation for auditions. That's one question. Also, being on the other side of the equation, interviewing, as it were, this is what it is, interviewing panel, to be fair to the various candidates, because presumably there are other people being auditioned, not at the same time exactly, but you know, one after the other, aren't you presented with the same works to perform, or is it just left entirely to your choice, which seems to be not a level playing field?
In answer to your first question, the Guildhall students all do a thing called Mastering Auditions, which is a public event, and they audition as though they're doing an orchestral audition to a panel of LSO players. Now, the difference is they immediately get live feedback from the panel, and that can be from what they wear to what they play to any aspect of the audition. The second question, I think if everyone played the same piece, I think there would be a lot of problems, because you're not necessarily, although in theory it's a level playing field, you're not necessarily seeing the best of each candidate. And the idea is that each candidate selects works which best show off the good aspects of their performances. And I think it's very self-evident from auditions who are the good players and who are the bad players, regardless of the fact that they're doing different repertoire.
And the excerpts will be the same anyway, so there will be, you know, you'll get everyone playing the same there, so that can be directly comparison. And to be honest, you get, certainly in violin auditions, a lot of the repertoire is the same. You'll get people picking the same concertos, and you know. But as you say, you have to play what reflects how well that will show you off to your best.
Yes.
So, and, you know.
I think we've got time for one more question. Lady down here. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you. I was just wondering, in your experience, what comes first, a very good instrument or winning a job?
A very good instrument or
getting a job. Can you you know, like afford a really good instrument before you get a job to pay for it, or is it possible to win an audition without having one?
Gosh, yeah, that's tricky.
Well, a good instrument always, it might help, not just the sound, but it might help the player from the inspirational point of view, from the flexibility, from the coloring in sound.
For my part, I couldn't afford a good instrument before I joined the LSO. I bought them subsequently. I think the only advice I can give you is do the best that your resources allow you to do. And there are a lot of very good modern instruments around, you know, these days. So I'd suggest you take that route, because you can get very fine instruments that give you the capacity to get the job.
And you can tell, I mean, we've had people audition on not good instruments, and their quality of playing still, it's evident. And hopefully, if you get a job, you might be in a situation where, certainly in our orchestra, there is help. You know, there's instrument loans. There are a number of instruments that can be loaned to players. I hope other orchestras have the same kind of thing, but it shouldn't put you off auditioning, because you can hear a person, their quality playing, even if their instrument is not as fantastic as their playing is, I think.
I'm sorry to say that we've run out of time, but thank you so much for being such an attentive audience. I'd like to thank Maxine and Germán. Great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.